For my first video, I decided to talk about the syphilis study at Tuskegee. One of the reasons why I chose this is because this is one of the events that you just can't believe actually happened and for so long. There are so many ethical problems with it. I decided to go over some of those and compare it to the current APA ethics codes so that we could see what were the things that were wrong with it. And it's one of those events that caused certain regulations to come into play, which I think is really important. If you don't know anything about it, it was a study in Alabama, and it took place on the campus of Tuskegee Institute. They took 600 African American men, 399 of them had syphilis, and 201 did not. This took place from 1932 to 1972. Now, that's a really long time. The purpose of the study, they said, was to record the, quote, natural history of syphilis in blacks. One of the purposes sort of ended up being, it seems, to see, well, what happens when syphilis is untreated, which, if there were no cure for it, might be okay. However, eventually there was a cure, and they were not offered treatment, but we're going to talk about that. The understood purpose by the community and the participants was that it was this special government healthcare program where they were just essentially giving free healthcare, which is something that these people in this community did not otherwise have access to, so that was very appealing. The participants were told they're being treated for, quote, bad blood, which was a local term that could describe many ailments, just almost anything, right? So general healthcare. In exchange for taking part in the study, the men received free medical exams, free meals, burial insurance, so it was very appealing to be part of this study. What are some of the codes in the APA Codes of Conduct that would preclude this study from being performed today? The first one, Code 8.02, Informed Consent Research. Participants in this study, informed consent was not collected. The community members were aware of the study, but they did not understand what it really was. Under Code 8.02, it says that not only do you need to get informed consent, but it lists all these stipulations. They should know the purpose of the research, the procedures that are involved, how long it should take. They should know that they have a right to decline. They should know the foreseeable consequences. Now, an example of a consequence that happened was that there was a treatment eventually for syphilis and they were not offered a treatment. Now, had these men been told that, they probably wouldn't have participated in the study. Prospective research benefits, it doesn't seem that they were discussed that at all. Limits of confidentiality, they probably didn't know that either. And incentives for participation, and who to contact if they had questions. So as far as I could tell in my research, they were not informed of that either. Code 8.06, Offering Inducements for Research. So this code says that psychologists make reasonable efforts to avoid offering excessive or inappropriate inducements. In my opinion, what happened in this study was exactly that. Participants were offered medical exams, rides to and from clinics, meals on examination days, free treatment for minor ailments, and guarantees that provisions would be made after their deaths in terms of burial stipends. This community is a community that did not normally have a lot of access to things like medical exams and rides to the clinic. So this is something that, of course, if someone's going to offer this to you, you're going to take it. And especially when you don't really know what you're agreeing to. So that right there is very unethical. You're providing these people something that they would do almost anything to get because they don't have access to it, but they don't actually know what they're agreeing to because there was no informed consent. Code 8.07, Deception and Research. So this code says a lot of things about deception, but the one that I picked to focus on is psychologists do not deceive prospective participants about research that is reasonably expected to cause physical pain or severe emotional distress. Now, the fact that this study ended up having participants that had syphilis that were not given treatment when a treatment was known, that is definitely causing physical pain or emotional distress. And there was definitely deceptions because participants were not offered available treatments and they were not informed of what the study really was. So again, they didn't really know what they were agreeing to. Why did it stop? So it went on for a really long time, which surprises me. However, in 1972, the study was put under review by the Health and Scientific Affairs Department, and the advisory panel concluded that it was ethically unjustified and advised the stopping of the study. So finally, after many years, the study was stopped. The year after that, a class action lawsuit was filed, resulting in $10 million out-of-court settlement in 1974. This sort of started a snowball effect of some regulations that ended up being put in place because once it was really reviewed, they realized how unethical it was. An example of that is in 1974, the National Research Act was signed into law. Regulations were passed that required researchers to get voluntary informed consent from all participants taking part in studies, which again, at the time, they did not take any informed consent. They also require that all DHEW-supported studies using human subjects be reviewed by institutional review boards. This was not a requirement before, so this was one of the things that started the requirement of IRBs. Also, an ethics advisory board was formed in the late 1970s to review ethical issues of biomedical research. As a result of this work, the 1979 publication, commonly known as the Belmont Report, summarized 3 ethical principles that should guide human research. The first part of the Belmont Report talks about respect for persons, incorporates at least 2 ethical convictions. First, that the individuals should be treated as autonomous agents, and second, that persons with diminished autonomy are entitled to protection. In this situation, this community in this time frame would definitely be considered persons with diminished autonomy, because if you are poor and you are Black in the 30s, you don't have access to everything that middle class or rich white people have access to. So again, going back to offering enticements for the study, what they were offering was really out of balance with what these people were going to get out of it. The next part of the Belmont Report talks about beneficence. This is persons are treated in an ethical manner not only by respecting their decisions and protecting them from harm, but also by making efforts to secure their well-being. This study, definitely they were not protected from harm. They were not only not protected from harm, I would argue they were harmed. People running the study knew that a number of the men had syphilis, and when penicillin came into popular use and it was known that that could cure syphilis, they were not offered that treatment, thus they were harmed. The last part of the 3 main points of the Belmont Report is justice. Who ought to receive the benefits of the research and bears its burdens? This is a question of justice, in a sense, fairness in distribution. These men sacrificed for this study, essentially, right, having untreated syphilis. Who is benefiting from that information? It wasn't necessarily their community that was benefiting. Their community wasn't benefiting because they weren't being offered treatment. This page shows my references. So just as a closing point, the main things that stuck out to me about this study were no informed consent, the enticements were too much, the people were harmed, there was no one really reviewing the study constantly to see if it was ethical or not. And if I were to pick what I think was the worst part of all of that, it would be the deception and the lack of informed consent. Because if you had syphilis and someone said, do you want to not be treated even though there's a treatment so that we can learn from this? Most people would say no, but at least they could say no. The people in this study didn't even understand what was going on, so that was completely unethical.